whispers of forgotten empires, echoes of lost gods, and truths buried in time. Welcome to Ancient Luminaries, where the ancient world comes alive.
Imagine you are in Rome on a quiet morning when the air still feels cool against stone. The streets are already awake, but not yet loud. You can hear a distant scooter, a few footsteps, a thin ribbon of conversation, and the soft echo of your own pace as you move past ancient walls and modern storefronts that share the same ground like two layers of time pressed together. You come here thinking you are visiting art, but you are really visiting a question. Because Rome, especially the Rome of the Renaissance, is not only a city of marble and paint, it is a city that tried to rebuild the human mind. It tried to take the fragments of the ancient world and ask, calmly and boldly, what a human being is meant to know, and how a human being is meant to live. So you step into a space that does not feel like a museum. It feels like a chamber of thought. You look up, and instead of seeing a ceiling, you see a vision. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel is the kind of work that does not politely ask for your attention. It takes it. It surrounds you with bodies that strain, reach, twist, and fall. It turns theology into anatomy and anatomy into drama. Whatever you believe, you can feel the ambition to place the entire human story beneath one painted sky. But today, you let that ceiling be your doorway, not your destination. Because a short walk away, another artist leaves you a different kind of sky. Raphael gives you not the thunder of creation, but the architecture of thought. He gives you a room where ideas are not written as words. They are written as people. And in the center of that painted world, in the fresco known as the School of Athens, two figures walk toward you as if they are about to step down from history into your own life. Plato and Aristotle. If you enjoy this kind of story, where philosophy becomes tangible and ancient debates suddenly sound modern, consider subscribing. Not because you need more content, but because the longer you stay with these thinkers, the more you start noticing that the arguments they began are still shaping the way we argue, the way we learn, and the way we try to make sense of the chaos in our own heads. Now focus on what Raphael does with their hands. Plato gestures upward, Aristotle gestures downward. It is one of the simplest visual symbols in the history of art, and it contains an entire war of worldview. Plato says, "Look beyond what you see." Aristotle says, "Look carefully at what you see." Plato says truth is above. Aristotle says truth is within. And we are not just talking about school as an academic subject. We are talking about two different instincts that still live inside us. One instinct wants certainty that does not rot. The other wants knowledge that actually explains the world we touch. You can feel these instincts when you face big questions. When you feel betrayed, you want to know whether there is such a thing as real justice, not just the kind that depends on who has power. When you lose someone you love, you want to know whether there is a deeper meaning behind the disappearance, not just biology and time. When your mind feels overwhelmed by modern noise, you want a principle, a discipline, a way to stand upright without being dragged by every emotion. And this is why the fresco matters. It is not a celebration of trivia, it is a map of the human search. So let's begin with Plato, the one pointing upward. Plato is often treated as a dreamer, a poet of ideas. But that description misses the tension in his work. Plato was not naive about reality, he was almost painfully suspicious of it. He lived in a world where politics could kill you, where public opinion could shift like smoke, where even noble people could become violent when the crowd demanded it. His teacher Socrates was executed by the state, condemned by a vote. That fact alone leaves a mark. If a city can kill its most honest thinker, Plato reasons, then the world of public life is not a safe guardian of truth. So Plato begins with a problem that sounds simple, but becomes terrifying when you sit with it. Everything changes. Bodies age, empires fall, opinions shift, pleasure fades, and even what seems solid is constantly becoming something else. If everything changes, Plato asks, where can truth live? Because truth, in Plato's mind, cannot be the kind of thing that changes. Truth must be stable, reliable, unbreakable. It must be something that does not become tired, does not decay, does not depend on whether the crowd cheers or boos. This is why Plato is drawn to mathematics. A triangle drawn in the sand may be imperfect, but the idea of a triangle is not. The concept of equality does not wear out. The number 2 does not become 3 when you are sad. And if there are truths like that, Plato suspects, then the deepest truth must be more like that than like a physical object. Now he offers you a story that has survived for more than 2,000 years because it is not merely an argument, it is an experience. The allegory of the cave. Imagine a group of human beings chained in a cave since childhood. Their legs are bound, their necks are fixed. They can only face one direction. Behind them, there is a fire, and between the fire and them, people move along a raised path carrying objects. The objects cast shadows on the wall in front of the prisoners, and the prisoners, unable to turn, see nothing but those shadows. To them, the shadows are reality. They name the shadows. They build status around the shadows. They argue about which shadows are most important. They predict which shadow will come next. They live entire lives inside a world of moving silhouettes, convinced that this is what exists. Then one prisoner is freed. At first, he feels pain, not liberation. His body hurts. His eyes hurt. Turning around feels like torture because the fire's light is too harsh. He doesn't understand what he is seeing. The shadows were clear. This is confusing. But the story says he is dragged upward, out of the cave. The sunlight outside is even more violent. He cannot look at it. He sees reflections first, then shapes, then living beings, and finally he begins to see the sun as the source of all the light he is receiving. And suddenly he understands. The shadows were not false, in the sense that they did not exist at all. They were false in the sense that they were not the deepest layer of reality. They were copies, effects, distortions. Now Plato makes the story sting by adding one more detail. The freed prisoner returns to the cave to tell the others. And the others laugh at him. They mock him. They say he is blind now, because he cannot see the shadows clearly anymore. And if he tries to free them, they might even kill him. Plato is not being dramatic for entertainment. He is describing a psychological pattern. Human beings get attached to familiar illusions. Education, in Plato's view, is not simply learning information. It is turning the soul. It is a painful reorientation. It is leaving a comforting prison for an unfamiliar truth. So what is the outside of the cave? Plato's answer is the world of forms. A form to Plato is not a physical shape. It is the stable essence of a thing. It is what makes something the kind of thing it is, at the deepest level. Beauty itself, justice itself, courage itself, equality itself, a perfect circle, a perfect good. In the physical world, we see beautiful things, but they are temporary. A face ages, a flower wilts, a melody ends. Plato says those things are beautiful because they participate in beauty, but they are not beauty itself. The form is what the mind grasps when it recognizes a pattern that goes beyond any one example. When you see a just action, you know it is just because you have some sense of justice, a standard. Plato says that standard is not invented by society in the way fashion is invented. It is a reality that exists in a deeper realm of being, a realm that is stable. This is why Plato's hand points upward. He is pointing to a reality that is not made of flesh and stone. He is pointing to a reality that can be known by reason, not by eyesight. But Plato is not content with just saying, forms exist. He also asks a question that feels like the engine room of metaphysics. If the forms are perfect and unchanging, and the physical world is messy and changing, how does the physical world exist at all? How can an unchanging pattern touch a changing world? One of Plato's most famous attempts to answer that is in the Timaeus, where he describes the universe as shaped by a rational craftsman, a divine organizer often called the demiurge. The demiurge looks to an eternal model, a pattern, and then imposes order on chaos. In this story, the world is not an accident. The world is not just atoms colliding. The world has structure because it is shaped by reason. This idea will become a bridge for later thinkers, including religious thinkers, because it offers a way to say that reality is intelligible. The universe can be known because it is built with a mind-like order. But now we turn to Aristotle, the one pointing downward. Aristotle studied under Plato. He admired him, but he believed Plato had made a mistake that could not be ignored. Plato, Aristotle thought, had separated truth from the world too much. If forms exist in a separate realm, Aristotle asks, what do they explain? Saying this horse is a horse because it participates in the form of horse sounds like an explanation, but does it tell you anything about why horses grow, why they move, why they get sick, why they die? Aristotle wants explanations that can actually account for the processes of the world. So, Aristotle begins with a different trust. He trusts that the world is a place where knowledge can be built. Not perfect knowledge, not instant certainty, but a disciplined understanding grounded in observation and reason. Aristotle turns philosophy into method. He studies logic to determine what counts as a valid argument. He studies nature to determine how change happens. He studies animals, plants, and human behavior, not to collect trivia, but to see patterns. He says that if you want to know what a thing is, you should look at how it behaves, what it becomes, and what it is for. This is where Aristotle introduces one of the most influential tools in Western thought, the four causes. If you want to explain a thing, Aristotle says, you can ask four kinds of why. What is it made of? The material cause. What structure makes it the kind of thing it is? The formal cause. What produces it or changes it? The efficient cause. What is it for? What is its purpose or end? The final cause. To modern ears, purpose can sound suspicious, as if it implies a conscious designer behind everything. But Aristotle's point is broader. Living beings, he observes, behave as if they are aiming at an end. An acorn tends toward becoming an oak. An eye tends toward seeing. A knife tends toward cutting. To ignore this forness is to ignore a massive part of how the world presents itself. Now, Aristotle's deeper disagreement with Plato comes into focus. Plato treats form as something separate, floating above. Aristotle brings form inside the thing. He says a thing is a unity of matter and form. Matter is the stuff. Form is the organizing principle. A statue is bronze shaped into a figure. A house is wood and stone organized into a plan. A living being is flesh organized into a life. For Aristotle, the form of a living being is not just a shape. It is the principle that gives it its functions, its growth, its identity. A plant is not just matter arranged in a plant-like outline. It has a life pattern that makes it take in nourishment, grow, reproduce, and respond to its environment. In this view, you do not need a separate realm of forms to explain what you see. The form is the intelligible structure of the thing itself, grasped by the mind through study. Aristotle's approach also has a moral dimension. Plato's ethics often reach upward toward an abstract good, a perfect standard. Aristotle's ethics reach downward into lived practice. He asks, what kind of person becomes excellent? His answer is virtue, but virtue is not a mystical glow. It is a habit, a trained disposition, a stable character shaped by repeated actions over time. Courage is not a feeling you wait for. It is something you practice until it becomes part of you. Temperance is not a rule you obey once. It is a pattern of self-control you build. Justice is not a speech you make. It is a consistent way of treating others. And Aristotle adds an idea that seems almost simple, but changes everything. Virtue is often a mean between extremes. Courage is between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity is between stinginess and waste. Pride is between self-hatred and arrogance. This is why Aristotle's ethics feel like a guide for real life. He is not asking you to escape your humanity. He is asking you to shape it. But Aristotle's thought also reaches upward in its own way. Because if nature is intelligible, if motion and change occur, Aristotle asks, what is the deepest explanation for motion itself? He rejects the idea of an infinite chain of movers without foundation, so he posits the unmoved mover, a reality that is pure actuality, the ultimate source that moves others without itself being moved. This is not a sentimental God, it is a philosophical anchor, a foundation that makes the world's movement intelligible. For centuries, later thinkers will argue over this concept, reshape it, and connect it with religious theology. But in Aristotle's system, it is part of a larger pattern. Reality is not random. It has a structure, and understanding that structure is the work of reason. Now step back and notice what we have. Plato gives the West a hunger for transcendent truth. Aristotle gives the West a framework for studying the world. And then a third tradition rises in the aftermath of Alexander's conquests. In the turbulent world of the Hellenistic era, when old city-states have been swallowed by larger kingdoms, and ordinary people begin to feel small under massive forces. This tradition is Stoicism. Stoicism begins not as a university subject, but as a life response. A man named Zeno of Citium, after a shipwreck that ruins his fortune, arrives in Athens and begins to study philosophy. Later, he teaches in a public colonnade called the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch. His followers become Stoics because they gather at the Stoa. This detail matters because it shows the spirit of Stoicism. Stoicism is not confined to private aristocratic circles. It is a public way of life. It is philosophy as training. Stoicism looks at the world and says, you cannot control everything. You cannot control storms, disease, war, political upheaval, or other people's choices. But you can control something. You can control how you judge what happens. You can control the relationship between events in your mind. This is where Stoicism becomes both empowering and dangerous, depending on how it is interpreted. The Stoic worldview begins with the idea of logos, a rational principle that orders the universe. The world, the Stoics say, is not chaos. It is structured by reason. Even what looks tragic may be part of a larger order. This can sound comforting. It can also sound cold. But the Stoics are not trying to deny suffering. They are trying to find a way to remain stable inside it. For the Stoics, the human being is a rational creature. To live well is to live according to reason, in harmony with nature. And the core of living well is virtue. Not wealth, not reputation, not pleasure, virtue. Stoicism develops a powerful distinction that will echo through centuries. Some things are up to you, some things are not. The Stoics call the things not up to you externals: health, wealth, fame, political position, other people's love. These things can be preferred, but they are not the foundation of a good life because they can be taken away. The only true good, the Stoics insist, is virtue: wisdom, justice, courage, temperance. If you build your identity on externals, you become a slave to luck. If you build your identity on virtue, you become free. Now, how does a Stoic become free? This is where Stoicism becomes intensely psychological. The Stoics argue that emotions are not simply things that happen to you. They are connected to judgments. You are not terrified because a sound occurs. You are terrified because you judge that sound as dangerous, as a threat, as something you cannot handle. You are not devastated because someone insults you. You are devastated because you judge their insult as having the power to define your worth. Stoic training focuses on assent. An impression appears. A thought arises. A story forms in your mind. Do you assent to it? Do you accept it as true? Or do you pause, examine, and choose a different judgment? This pause is the heart of Stoic freedom. It is the space between stimulus and response. It is the moment where you decide whether you will be dragged or whether you will stand. In a modern world of notifications, outrage cycles, and constant emotional stimulation, you can see why Stoicism is popular again. It offers a technique. Don't let the world press your buttons without your permission. But Stoicism is not just self-help, it is cosmic. The Stoics see the universe as a living whole, like a body. Everything is connected through the logos. Human beings, because they possess reason, participate in this cosmic rationality. Therefore, virtue is not just personal discipline, it is alignment with the order of the world. This leads to another Stoic idea, fate. The Stoics often speak as if everything happens according to fate, meaning according to the causal chain of nature. Your body, your circumstances, your era, and the events around you are not chosen by you, but within this network, you still have something. You have the capacity to respond with virtue. So the Stoic does not rage at fate. The Stoic works with it. A famous image later Stoics use is the dog tied to a cart. The cart moves forward. The dog can either run willingly, staying upright, or be dragged. The cart will move either way. The choice is whether you move with dignity. Now, why did Romans love Stoicism? Because Rome was an empire of power and instability. To be a politician in Rome was to live under constant threat: rivals, accusations, exile, assassination. Even emperors could be killed by their own guards. Wealth could vanish, status could collapse overnight. In that environment, Stoicism offered an inner fortress. It taught a senator how to face disgrace without falling apart. It taught a general how to endure loss without being consumed by grief. It taught an emperor, at least in theory, how to rule without being enslaved by ego. This is why Roman Stoicism becomes famous through figures like Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. Seneca, wealthy and politically entangled, writes about simplicity and self-control while living in luxury. This tension makes him both fascinating and suspicious. Yet he also shows that Stoicism is not about pretending you have no temptations. It is about fighting them. Epictetus, a former slave, teaches Stoicism as an almost brutally practical discipline. His message is simple: you can lose everything, but you cannot be forced to surrender your moral agency unless you give it away. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor, writes private notes to himself that become the Meditations, a record of a man trying to remind himself that power does not cancel mortality, that victory does not cancel inner weakness, and that a good life is measured by character, not applause. These Roman Stoics helped turn Stoicism into a moral language that later cultures inherit. But Stoicism also collides with other traditions. It collides with Plato's upward pull. It collides with Aristotle's careful observation. And it collides, most dramatically, with Christianity. Because Christianity also talks about virtue, self-control, and an ordered universe, but it places a different emphasis on grace, on personal relationship with God, on the meaning of suffering, and on the value of the individual beyond rational mastery. Christian thinkers will borrow Stoic tools, especially the idea that you must discipline your judgments, that anger and fear can be examined, that virtue matters more than wealth. But they will also resist Stoicism's tendency to treat emotions as errors, because Christian tradition often sees certain emotions as morally meaningful: compassion, grief, love. The tension becomes a long conversation across centuries. And now we return to the painted room, to the hands. Because Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics are not three isolated islands. They are a river system. Their ideas flow into one another, separate, rejoin, and reshape the landscape. Plato gives you a hunger for what is beyond appearances. Aristotle gives you a disciplined way to study the world of appearances without being trapped by them. Stoicism gives you a practical technology for living inside appearances without being owned by them. But here is the deeper question that this entire tradition forces on you. What does it mean to know something? Plato would say, to know is to grasp what is stable, what does not change. Aristotle would say, to know is to understand causes, to see why a thing is what it is. Stoicism would say, to know is to understand what is up to you and what is not, and to live according to that understanding. Now, if you listen carefully, you can hear that these are not only intellectual positions, they are emotional positions. Plato's upward gesture is the gesture of someone who cannot tolerate a world where justice is only politics. Aristotle's downward gesture is the gesture of someone who cannot tolerate a world where thinking floats free from reality. The Stoic gesture, if we could paint it, might be the gesture of someone placing a hand on their chest as if to say, whatever happens out there, I will not let it destroy what happens in here. And that is why this debate never ends. In every era, human beings face the same dilemma. Do we seek truth in a realm above the world, a realm of ideals, hoping to find something pure? Do we seek truth in the world itself, through careful observation and method, hoping to build reliable knowledge? Or do we seek truth in the art of living, in the discipline of judgment, hoping to become stable no matter what the world does? You can see these options in modern life. The person who believes in abstract principles, sometimes without compromise, sounds like a Platonist. The person who trusts science and method above everything sounds like an Aristotelian. The person who focuses on resilience, self-control, and inner peace sounds like a Stoic. Most of us are mixtures. We want ideals, but we also want evidence. We want method, but we also want meaning. We want inner stability, but we also want love. So what can we take from this? First, Plato teaches you to distrust the easy story your senses tell. Not because senses are worthless, but because they are incomplete. He teaches you to ask, is what I see the full reality, or only a shadow? He teaches you that education is not a download of facts. It is a transformation of the self. Second, Aristotle teaches you to build knowledge that actually explains things. He teaches you to respect the complexity of the world. He teaches you to look for causes, to observe carefully, to test arguments. He teaches you that virtue is not a mystical state. It is a habit built by practice. Third, Stoicism teaches you to stand inside reality without panic. It teaches you to separate what you can control from what you cannot. It teaches you to slow your ascent, to examine impressions, to choose judgments. It teaches you that freedom is not given by circumstances. It is built in the mind and expressed in action. Now here's the part most people miss. These traditions do not only compete, they can complement. Plato's vision without Aristotle's method can become fantasy. Aristotle's method without Plato's moral hunger can become a cold machine. Stoicism without compassion can become emotional denial. But when these traditions are held in tension, they can form a kind of balanced human wisdom. Plato gives you the sky, the sense that truth is more than convenience. Aristotle gives you the earth, the sense that truth must be tested against reality. Stoicism gives you the spine, the sense that truth must become a way of living. And now, if we return one last time to Raphael's room, we can see why Renaissance thinkers loved this image. They were trying to rebuild a civilization. They were trying to reconnect faith, reason, art, and politics. They were trying to recover ancient tools for understanding the world while living inside a Christian society that had its own claims about truth. The School of Athens is not only a tribute to Greece, it is a statement that human beings are built to ask questions. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all. Philosophy is not a set of answers. It is a discipline of attention. It is the refusal to let the obvious be the final word. It is the courage to admit you may be living inside a cave. It is the humility to study the world before declaring what it means. It is the strength to accept that you cannot control everything and to choose virtue anyway. So when you leave the room, when you walk back into modern Rome, the street will still be busy. The air will still be full of noise. The world will still demand your reactions. But if you carry these three traditions with you, you may find a small space opening inside your day. A space where you pause. A space where you ask what is real. A space where you look upward, then downward, then inward. And if you take one habit from this long walk through Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics, let it be this: pause before you react. Ask what you truly know, what you only assume, and what you can choose. The past cannot hand you certainty, but it can hand you practice. Practice attention, practice virtue, and practice the courage to revise yourself today.
Tonight's story comes to an end here, but the past never truly goes silent. It lingers like a candle's last glow, whispering its warnings, its wonders, and its unanswered questions into the present. If this journey moved you, leave a like, subscribe to Ancient Luminaries, and tell me in the comments